When your own son looks you in the eye and says, "You are nothing to us," you either crawl into grave early or you decide to rise. I chose the latter. That winter evening, the air on the New England coast bit through my coat as if the Atlantic itself had teeth. Snow whipped sideways across the cliffs, rattling the glass of the lighthouse windows. It was supposed to be a family Christmas. Laughter, grandkids, hot cider by the fire. Instead, I stood in my son's kitchen, staring at Joseph, my own flesh and blood, as he named his price like I was a bank teller and not his father. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. 20,000, Dad. Joseph said, "The word's hard, deliberate for the restoration. We need it before New Year's. You've done it before. You can do it again." Beside him, Elton leaned against the counter with that satisfied curl on her lips. She had the knack of looking at me as though I were a stray that had outstayed its welcome. "If you really care about your grandchildren, Dorian, you'd stop hoarding and open your wallet," she chimed in, her voice sharp and sweet, the kind of tone meant to humiliate. I'd paid off their mortgage once, cleared their credit cards more than once. I'd even covered the repairs on their second car. And here they stood, treating me like an obstacle, not a man who'd spent decades breaking his back to make sure they never went hungry. I looked at Joseph, searching for the boy who once begged me to carry him on my shoulders down the pier, the boy who cried when I left for night shifts at the shipyard. But all I saw was entitlement carved into the lines of his face. "No," I said simply. My voice didn't rise, didn't falter. "I won't." Elton laughed. "Of course. The great Dorian the miser. You'd rather let the lighthouse rot than let your family have a future." Joseph's face darkened. He stepped closer, his voice lowering into a hiss that stung worse than the winter wind. "You're nothing to us, old man. You're not part of this family anymore." For a moment, the world stopped. The kitchen light flickered, as if it too recoiled from the words. My throat tightened, not with weakness, but with the weight of betrayal. I had given them everything, my savings, my time, my love, and in return, my son cast me out like refuse. He opened the door to the storm. The snow screamed into the frame, coating the hardwood floor. "Get out," Joseph said. "Go back to your empty house. We don't need you." I stepped into the gale, the door slamming behind me. The wind shoved at my back, the cold biting my hands raw. But the fire inside me burned hotter than the frost could smother. Every crunch of my boots in the snow echoed a truth. They had severed the bond, but in doing so, they had freed me. As I reached the path that curved toward the cliffs, I looked up. The lighthouse beam cut across the storm, slicing through snow and dark. For decades it had stood as a symbol of guidance, of family pride. Now, to me, it was something else, a crown they believed was theirs alone. I clenched my fists. The lighthouse wasn't just stone and iron. It was legacy, it was power, it was mine as much as theirs. And if Joseph thought he could strip me of my place, then I would answer him in the only language he and Elton seemed to understand. The wind roared louder, carrying the sea's rage, and I whispered into the night, "You will regret those words, son. You will regret them." Because I already knew I would not crawl into any grave. I would rise, and when I rose, I would make sure the light of that tower revealed every shadow they tried to hide. And that night, as the storm swallowed me whole, the first thought of revenge took root. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a brittle silence. Snow clung to the shingles of my house like the weight of years, and the sea stretched out gray and endless beyond the cliffs. I lit the stove, poured myself a cup of bitter coffee, and stared at the frost forming on the window pane. Joseph's words still echoed in my skull. "You're nothing to us." They came back in waves, cutting deeper each time. I'd carried those kids on my shoulders, fixed every broken pipe in their home, written checks when their bank accounts bled red. And yet here I was, treated like a stranger. No, worse, like an inconvenience. By noon, I decided I wouldn't sit in silence. I pulled on my old peacoat, the one I'd worn since my shipyard days, and drove down the coast road until the lighthouse beam disappeared behind the bluffs. There was a cafe tucked beside the harbor, The kind of place where fishermen thaw their bones over chowder and black coffee. That's where Holden still worked his files, or so I'd heard. Holden had been my lawyer once, long ago, when a land dispute nearly cost me the very ground under my boots. He wasn't flashy, not the kind of man who filled a courtroom with grand speeches, but he knew how to find what others overlooked. He owed me once, too, something about a favor I'd done for his brother when trouble came knocking. He looked older now, balding, glasses perched halfway down his nose, but when he saw me step into the cafe, recognition sparked his eyes. "Dorian," he said, standing just enough to shake my hand. "Didn't expect to see you walking in here. What brings you?" I sat across from him, the wood chair creaking beneath me. "Family," I answered. "And betrayal." Holden raised a brow, but didn't interrupt. I told him everything. Joseph's demand for $20,000, Elton's smirk, the words that cut the last string between father and son. I kept my voice steady, but my hands gripped the coffee cup like it was the only anchor keeping me from drifting into rage. When I finished, Holden leaned back, studying me. "You don't strike me as a man looking to forgive." "I'm not," I said. "I'm looking to take back what's mine." His fingers tapped the table, slow, thoughtful. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a worn folder. "You know," he said, sliding it toward me, "there's something about that lighthouse most folks have forgotten. Property records can be a funny thing." I opened the folder. Inside were documents, old deeds and transfer papers, lines of ink that dated back decades. My name was there. My wife's, rest her soul. Joseph's name, too, but not alone. The lighthouse had never been theirs outright. It had been joint property, tied up in a tangle of clauses only a lawyer like Holden could unwind. I looked at him, my pulse quickening. "So you're saying?" "I'm saying if you want it, the law's on your side. You just have to sign." The cafe seemed to grow quieter around us. The only sound of gulls outside, and the clink of spoons against chipped mugs. The thought of the beams sweeping across the Atlantic, not as their prize but as my inheritance, ignited something in my chest. I closed the folder slowly, feeling the weight of destiny in my hands. "Prepare the papers," I told him. Holden gave a small nod, as if he'd expected nothing less. As I stepped out into the cold air again, the lighthouse loomed far down the coast, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. They had cast me out into the storm, but I had found a weapon sharper than any blade. The truth hidden in ink and parchment, and I knew exactly when I would strike. Because revenge, I realized, is best delivered not in secret, but in the full blaze of light. The days that followed were clear and brittle, the kind of December days where the sky turns steel and the ocean looks like molten lead. I drove back from Holden's office with a folder of documents on the passenger seat, and for the first time in years, I felt a calm I couldn't explain. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even relief. It was purpose sharp, steady, undeniable. Holden moved quickly. By the end of the week, the papers were ready, neat and ironclad. With one signature, I could redraw the lines of ownership. The lighthouse, the pride of this family, would be mine alone, not as a gift, not as charity, but by right. As the ink dried, I pictured Joseph's face, twisted in smug confidence. I knew he was parading around the neighborhood, telling anyone who'd listened that the old man had finally broken. Word travels fast on the coast, faster than the tides. By the time I stepped into the general store for bread and kerosene, I heard it from the clerk herself. "Your boy was in here," she said, lowering her voice as though gossip had weight. "Told everyone you've given up. Said the lighthouse is theirs to restore now." I forced a thin smile. "Is that so?" "Oh, yes." They were bragging. "Said you don't have the stomach for these winters anymore, that you'll be gone soon enough." I thanked her, paid, and walked out into the crisp air. My stomach churned, but not with shame, with satisfaction. Let him believe it. Let them both dance in the glow of their supposed victory. On the bluff near the lighthouse, I paused to watch. Joseph had invited neighbors up, pointing proudly at the tower as if it were his conquest. Elton's laugh carried over the wind, shrill and hollow. Children ran in and out of the snow, and Joseph's voice boomed over them. We're going to make this place shine again. Dad couldn't handle it. He's done. This lighthouse belongs to us now. I stood far enough that he couldn't see me, but close enough to hear. Each word was a nail, driving deeper into his own coffin. The arrogance, the blindness, it would all make the fall that much harder. I thought of my wife, gone these many years. She loved that lighthouse, said its light reminded her of hope, even on the darkest nights. I whispered to her ghost then, standing in the cold. They'll learn what it means to betray blood. They'll learn. When I returned home, Holden's envelope waited on the desk. Inside, the deed rewritten, final. All I had to do was bide my time. And timing was everything. Christmas loomed. Families would gather. Wine would pour. Laughter would echo through the old stone tower. That would be the night when the candles were lit and the world expected joy. That would be when the truth struck like lightning. I folded the deed carefully, sliding it back into the envelope. The paper crackled in my hands, alive with promise. It wasn't just a document. It was justice bound in ink, vengeance given form. Through the window, the lighthouse beam cut across the night, slow and relentless, sweeping the coast like the eye of God. Soon, it would reveal them for what they were, and they would never see it coming. Christmas week arrived draped in frost and silence. The shoreline was buried in white, and the harbor bells chimed against a sky as sharp as glass. To everyone else, the season meant warmth, family, and carols. For me, it meant preparation. Each morning I walked the cliff path, my breath clouding before me, the lighthouse always in view. It stood like a sentinel, stone, iron, and memory. For Joseph, it was nothing more than an inheritance, a trophy to flaunt. For me, it was legacy, a monument to years of sweat and sacrifice. And soon, it would become the instrument of his undoing. Holden's papers rested inside a plain brown envelope on my desk at home. I would take them out, smooth the creases, and read the clauses again and again until the words burned into my mind. The lighthouse was mine. The law was clear. The ink was permanent. All that remained was choosing the right moment to reveal it. Joseph made that choice for me. On Christmas Eve morning, as I walked down the pier for supplies, I overheard him. He was leaning against his truck, speaking to a neighbor with that smug grin etched deep into his face. "Dad's finished," Joseph said. "We've got the tower now. He won't be back. Couldn't handle the winters. Couldn't handle us." The neighbor chuckled politely, but Joseph pressed on, voice swelling with pride. "The restoration will be my legacy. The lighthouse is ours alone." I stood just beyond sight, listening. Every word was arrogance distilled, and every word tightened the knot of justice I had prepared. That night, Holden came by. He didn't stay long. Just a quiet knock on the door and nod, and a confirmation that everything was filed, sealed, and untouchable. "You sure about the timing?" he asked, his breath fogging in the cold. "Timing," I said, "is everything." He studied me, then offered the smallest of smiles. "Then Christmas dinner it is." When he left, I sat by the fire with the envelope on my lap. The flame snapped, casting shadows that danced across the walls, and I thought of Joseph's words, the venom in them. "You're nothing to us." Soon he would learn the weight of words, how they cut not just once, but forever. I imagined the dinner, Elton laughing too loudly, Joseph toasting himself, the grandchildren's eyes wide with wonder at the decorations. And then me, quietly sliding the envelope across the table. My gift, my reckoning. The thought steadied me, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. A man can only be stripped of dignity so many times before he decides to reclaim it with both hands. Before bed, I walked out onto the porch. The night was still, the air sharp with salt and pine. Far off, the lighthouse beam swept across the dark sea, steady and eternal. It illuminated the cliffs, the snow, the path I would walk the next evening. And in that turning light, I saw not just a tower of stone, but a stage, a place where truth would burn away pretense. Christmas was coming, and with it, the unveiling of my revenge. Christmas Day arrived cloaked in tradition, but for me, it carried the weight of something else, finality. The roads were lined with evergreens sagging under snow, and the town bustled with cheer. Children laughed on sleds, shop windows glowed with wreaths, and bells rang from the old church tower. It was as if the world had chosen that day to remind me of joy. But in my chest, another fire burned, steady, controlled, waiting. The invitation to dinner came not from Joseph, but from Elton. Her handwriting on the card was neat, almost regal, as if she were summoning a servant rather than welcoming a father-in-law. Still, I accepted. I had no intention of staying away. Not tonight. As dusk fell, I walked the path to the lighthouse. The sea crashed below, the horizon swallowed by clouds. The tower loomed above, its lantern sweeping across the coast like a slow heartbeat. I carried only a small parcel under my arm, the envelope, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string, my gift. Inside, the warmth and chatter struck me like a wall. The dining table was laid out in splendor, roasted meats, candles flickering, children darting between chairs. Laughter rose and fell like waves. But when I entered, the mood shifted just enough to sting. "Father," Joseph said, rising from his chair with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You made it." Elton's gaze slid over me, sharp as broken glass. "We saved you a seat at the end of the table." I nodded, took my place, and let the noise swirl around me. Plates clattered, wine poured, the children tugged at ribbons. And yet, in the midst of it, I was invisible, forgotten, deliberately so. At one point, Joseph raised his glass, his voice booming. "To family," he declared. "To the ones who build, who restore, who carry the torch forward." His eyes flicked toward me, mocking, and to those who watched from the sidelines. The table erupted in polite laughter. Elton smirked, the neighbors chuckled, and even the children seemed uneasy. I sat still, my face a mask. Inside, my pulse pounded steady as the beam turning overhead. I could have spoken then, could have shattered the illusion with a word. But patience is a companion of vengeance. I let Joseph revel in his moment. Let him believe his theater of triumph. Every toast, every slight glance in my direction, every chuckle at my expense, it only sharpened the edge of the gift I carried. The night deepened. Plates were cleared, desserts arrived, and the tower's beam swept rhythmically across the windows. I felt its light on my face, a reminder of what was coming, a reminder of what was mine. Finally, as the laughter swelled again, I pushed back my chair. The motion silenced the room, just enough. I reached for the parcel by my side, placed it gently on the table, and slid it forward. "Merry Christmas," I said, my voice calm, deliberate. The string unwound. The paper fell away. The brown envelope lay there, unremarkable to the eye, yet heavy with consequence. Joseph frowned. "What's this?" I leaned back, folded my hands. "My gift to the family." The air thickened. Elton's smile faltered. Joseph reached for the envelope, and as his fingers brushed the flap, I knew the night was about to change forever. Joseph tore the envelope open with the impatience of a man expecting a check. The crackle of paper cut through the silence. For a moment, all I heard was the wind rattling against the windows, the steady pulse of the lighthouse beams sweeping across the room. He unfolded the document, his eyes scanning the lines. At first his brows knit, then his face drained pale. The grin vanished. His lips parted, but no words came. Elton leaned closer, snatched the papers from his hand, and read. Her cheeks flushed red, then white, then red again. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "My gift," I said quietly, my hands folded on the table. "Merry Christmas." Joseph slammed the document flat on the table, the wine glasses trembling. This says the lighthouse is yours. Sole ownership. This is a lie." Holden's signature gleamed in ink at the bottom of the page, sealed and stamped with the county's authority. It was no lie. It was the law. "It's the truth," I said, my voice steady as the tower's beam. "The lighthouse was never yours alone. It was mine, and now it's mine alone." The children's laughter, which had filled the room minutes earlier, died away. Their wide eyes darted between parents and grandfather, confused, frightened. Elton rose to her feet, her chair scraping across the floor. "You tricked us," she spat. "You've stolen our future." "No," I corrected. "You stole mine first. You told me I was nothing. Tonight, I return the words to you." The room erupted. Elton turned on Joseph, her voice shrill, accusing. "You said he'd given up. You said the tower was ours. You idiot, you ruined everything." Joseph, red-faced and trembling, slammed his fist on the table. "Don't you dare put this on me. You!" He cut himself short, but the venom was already loose. The children whimpered, one of them bursting into tears. All the while, the lighthouse beam turned, flooding the room with its ghostly light, catching faces in stark relief. Elton's twisted rage, Joseph's desperate fury, the children's tears. Every sweep of light was a revelation, a spotlight on the collapse of a family that once believed itself untouchable. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, unsure whether to stay or flee. The laughter, the toasts, the pretense of togetherness, all gone, stripped bare in the span of minutes. Joseph rounded on me, eyes blazing. "You planned this," he said, voice hoarse. "Yes," I answered simply. "I planned this the moment you pushed me into the storm and told me I was no one." The words hung heavy, undeniable. I watched as they sank into him, the final nail hammered home by his own arrogance. The room, once full of warmth, now crackled with cold rage and humiliation. And as Joseph opened his mouth to roar back, the beam swept across his face again, illuminating a man stripped of pride, stripped of legacy, stripped of control. For the first time in his life, my son had no ground to stand on, and the night was only beginning. The silence after my words was heavier than stone. Joseph stood rigid, gripping the back of his chair, as if it might keep him from collapsing. Elton's eyes darted from the deed to her husband's face, and in that instant, the first fissure between them split wide open. "You told me," she hissed, her voice dripping venom. "You told me he was finished, that the lighthouse was ours. You paraded me in front of this town like some queen, and now I look like a fool." Joseph's jaw clenched. "Don't you dare turn this on me. You were the one pushing, always demanding more. Dad gave us everything, his money, his time, and you kept asking." The neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, forks clinking against untouched plates. The children cried softly, clinging to one another, while the beam of the lighthouse swept over us again, cold and relentless, highlighting each face like a confession. Elton's fury only grew. "Don't pretend you're innocent. You wanted him gone. You shoved him out into the storm, remember? You said he was no one. And now look, he's the only one who still holds power." Her words struck Joseph harder than any fist. His face twisted, shame and rage colliding. He pounded the table, rattling the glasses. "Shut up." But she didn't. Her voice cut sharper. "You've ruined us. You've ruined me." I sat in silence, watching the cracks turn into fractures. For years, they'd treated me like a burden, mocked my age, dismissed my sacrifices. Now, in the glow of the tower, their alliance splintered before my eyes. And I didn't need to lift a finger. Joseph turned toward me, desperate to claw back control. "You can't do this, Dad. Think of the children. You'll destroy this family." I looked at him evenly. "No, you destroyed it when you told me I was nothing. Tonight, I simply prove you wrong." The words sank deep, and his shoulders slumped as though the weight of them was too much. Elton shoved her chair back, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. "I won't stay here another minute. Not in his tower. Not in the ruins you've made of this family." She stormed toward the door, her coat whipping behind her. The children wailed, Joseph calling after her, but she didn't turn back. Not once. The neighbors began to murmur, standing awkwardly, gathering their coats. The feast was over. The illusion of harmony lay in tatters on the table, along with the torn wrapping paper and half-drunk wine. Joseph slumped back into his chair, staring at the deed as though it were a death sentence. His hands trembled, and for the first time in his life, he looked small, diminished. I stood, slid my coat over my shoulders, and turned to leave. At the threshold, I paused and looked back. The beam swept across Joseph's face once more, and in that stark white light, I saw not the son I had raised, but man undone by his own pride. You already told me the truth once, I said, my voice steady. I was nothing to you. Tonight, you learned what that really means. And then I stepped out into the night, the cold air filling my lungs like a baptism. Behind me, the tower kept turning, its light cutting through storm and shadow alike. And for the first time in decades, it belonged solely to me. The night after Christmas felt longer than any in memory. The storm outside had eased, but inside the tower, chaos lingered like smoke after fire. Elton was gone, dragging the children with her, their cries fading into the howl of the wind. Joseph remained behind, a man stripped bare, staring into the embers of a feast-turned-funeral. I left him there and walked home along the cliff path, the snow crunching beneath my boots. Each step felt deliberate, as though I were retracing the years of humiliation I had carried for his sake. But now the weight was gone. Every stride was lighter. I had reclaimed what was mine. At dawn, word spread through the small community. Neighbors whispered in the grocer's line, murmurs of how Joseph had been put in his place and how Elton had stormed out in fury. For decades, my name had been an afterthought, a shadow in my son's household. Now, suddenly, it was on everyone's lips again. Some spoke with sympathy, others with awe. All of them understood. The old man hadn't faded into obscurity. He'd struck. By midday, Joseph came knocking at my door. His face was gray, his eyes bloodshot, his pride clinging by a thread. He tried to smile, but it was the kind of smile a drowning man offers when he claims he can still swim. Dad, he started, his voice rough. We can fix this. Maybe we can work out a deal. Share it like before. I let him stand there in the cold, his breath clouding the air, before I answered. It was yours to share once. You chose otherwise. His shoulders sagged. You're really going to let Elton walk away with the kids? Over a piece of stone? I looked him dead in the eye. It was never about stone. It was about respect. You shattered that the moment you told me I was nothing. Don't ask me to pretend it can be glued back together. For a moment, I saw the boy he once was, the boy who looked to me for guidance, who wanted to believe his father was indestructible. But that boy had grown into a man who mistook kindness for weakness, who thought blood could be bent without consequence. Joseph swallowed hard, then turned and walked away, his figure shrinking against the snow. I watched until he vanished down the path. That evening, I lit a fire in my study. The deed lay on the desk beside a glass of whiskey. I stared at the flame, remembering my wife's laughter, her hand resting on my arm as we first climbed the spiral stairs of the tower years ago. She'd said the light belonged to us, to our family. I whispered to her memory now. It does again, but not how we imagined. Outside, the lighthouse beam kept its steady vigil, sweeping across the dark Atlantic, pulling ships to safety. It illuminated not just the sea, but the truth of our lives, what was broken, what remained. In town, gossip buzzed louder with every passing hour. People spoke of Joseph's humiliation, of Elton's rage. Their names carried shame now, while mine carried weight. It was a strange kind of justice, cold, absolute, undeniable. But justice, I knew, wasn't finished. The new year approached, and with it, more reckonings to come. The days between Christmas and New Year's carried a silence more dangerous than storms. Snow covered the roads in thick drifts. The sea heaved under gray skies, and the lighthouse beam swung on, indifferent to the wreckage it had revealed inside those stone walls. I didn't see Joseph in town. Word reached me through neighbors. He'd stopped showing up to the dock, left bills unpaid at the general store, spent hours wandering the tavern with a glass that never emptied. The same man who once strutted with pride through every gathering now avoided even the fishermen he used to boast to. One afternoon, I found him slumped against the fence at the edge of my property. His coat was open, snow collecting on his shoulders, his face hollow. He looked older than me, though I was the one with 64 years carved into my bones. "Dad," he muttered when he saw me, his voice thin as thread. I don't know what to do." I stood there a moment, studying him. This was my son, the boy I once carried to the top of the lighthouse to show him the horizon, the man who had spat in my face and cast me into the storm. Now he was reduced to a shadow, undone not by poverty, but by his own arrogance. You live with your choices. I said at last, that's what men do. His eyes glistened. Elton's gone. She took the kids. She blames me, says I ruined everything. And maybe she's right. Maybe she is. I said, my tone even. He dropped his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking. It wasn't the first time I'd seen my son cry, but it was the first time he wept from defeat rather than pain. For a flicker of a moment, I felt the urge to put a hand on his shoulder to remind him that he was still my blood. But then I remembered the words he'd hurled at me, sharp as ice. You are nothing to us. That sentence had built the wall between us, and some walls cannot be torn down. Go home, Joseph, I said quietly. Find whatever life you can salvage. But don't look to me to save you. He looked up, eyes red, lips trembling. You can't mean that. I mean every word. He staggered away, his figure dissolving into the white blur of the snow. I stood by the fence long after he vanished, the cold gnawing at my hands, the silence pressing in. Inside, I lit the fire and sat with a blank page before me. The quill in my hand trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of decision. I began to draft my will, not for Joseph, not for Elton, for the lighthouse itself, for the sea it guarded, for the generations who might understand what legacy truly means. As the fire crackled, I glanced through the window. The beam swung past again, cutting the night open. For the sailors, it was salvation. For me, it was a reminder. Power is inherited. It's earned. And sometimes it's taken back. That night, I slept with the papers beside my bed, knowing the story wasn't finished. The new year would arrive soon. And when it did, Joseph would face a truth colder than any winter wind. He had lost not just the lighthouse, but the respect, the family, and the name he had once carried with pride. And I would be the one left standing. The year's final days slipped away like tidewater, slow and inevitable. On New Year's Eve morning, the town was alive with festivity. Fireworks being prepared at the harbor, children dragging sleds down icy hills, neighbors greeting one another with cheer. But I moved through it all as a man apart, steady, focused, carrying a clarity sharper than the winter wind. The will sat finished on my desk, each page signed, each line declare my intent. The lighthouse, upon my death, would not pass back to Joseph or Elton. It would belong to the sea, to a maritime foundation that honored what the light had always been, a guide, not a possession. That decision anchored me. The legacy was secured. No one could twist it again. But still, one task remained, the final reckoning. Holden stopped by in the afternoon, his scarf tucked tightly against the cold. Everything's filed, he said, setting a copy of the deed and the will on the table. Ironclad. Not even Joseph's pride can pry this apart. I nodded, pouring him a cup of coffee. He'll try. Men like him always try. Holden studied me, eyes narrowing. And you? You seem calmer than I expected. I've already won, I told him. What comes next is only for the world to see. As dusk fell, I walked the cliff path once more. The lighthouse beam swept over the snow, unblinking, eternal. I thought back to the boy Joseph had been, standing here years ago with his small hand gripping mine, asking if the light could really reach all the way to Europe. I'd told him it could reach farther, into hearts, into memory, into the future. That boy had been swallowed by arrogance, but the light had never lied. When I reached the tower, I heard music inside, faint and brittle. Joseph was there, drinking, pretending to celebrate, though no one had come to share his toast. His neighbors had abandoned him, and Elton's absence was louder than any song. I didn't go in. Not yet. Instead, I stood outside, the snow falling around me, and I whispered to the sea, to my wife's memory, to the light itself. Tomorrow begins without him. Tomorrow belongs to the truth. I turned back toward home, the wind sharp against my face. The strategy was simple. Endure tonight, and with the new year, make the break complete. Joseph would face not just the loss of the lighthouse, but collapse of every illusion he clung to. Because the cruelest revenge isn't in the taking. It's in showing the world that the one who betrayed you can never reclaim what they squandered. And as midnight neared, Fireworks flared above the harbor. Their light filled the sky, but it was nothing compared to the steady beam of the lighthouse. My light, my vengeance. The new year dawned with a pale sky, the Atlantic restless beneath it. The town gathered at the harbor for the annual blessing of the fleet, a ritual older than most of us. Boats lined the pier, flags snapping in the wind, and neighbors clustered with mugs of coffee and cider, stamping their boots against the cold. It was tradition, community, resilience, a reminder that even in winter, we prepared for the seas ahead. I hadn't planned on attending, but then again, some battles aren't fought in private. They need an audience. I walked down Main Street with my coat buttoned high, the deed folded neatly in my breast pocket. Heads turned as I passed. I heard whispers ripple through the crowd. That's him, the father who took the tower back, the one who stood up. Their eyes didn't see weakness anymore. They saw resolve. Joseph was already at the harbor, glassy-eyed, clutching a thermos of something stronger than coffee. He stood near the front, trying to play the role of a leader, nodding to men who no longer nodded back. His words at Christmas had traveled far. Everyone knew now. Respect was currency here, and he had bankrupted himself. When the pastor began the blessing, the crowd hushed. The sea air bit my cheeks, and gulls wheeled above, crying out like old ghosts. And then, when the prayer ended, Joseph tried to reclaim ground. "Friends," he called, his voice rough but loud, "this new year is about legacy, about building something lasting. The lighthouse, our lighthouse, will shine brighter than ever before." Murmurs spread. Some looked away. Others smirked. I waited a beat, then stepped forward. My boots rang against the wooden planks. "Our lighthouse," I said, my voice clear enough to carry. "Or mine." Every head turned. I reached into my coat, pulled the folded deed, and held it high for all to see. The county seal, the law itself. The lighthouse belongs to me and me alone. Let no man here be deceived again. Gasps, whispers. Joseph's face drained white. The pastor blinked, stunned, and then the crowd began to nod. Some even clapped, quietly at first, then louder. Joseph lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "Why are you doing this?" he hissed, his breath sour. "Why humiliate me?" I leaned close enough for only him to hear. "Because you did the same to me. And a man reaps what he sows." His grip faltered. Around us, the applause swelled. Neighbors pressing my hand, thanking me, honoring the stand I had taken. Joseph stood forgotten in the middle of it, his pride collapsing like a rotted pier under too much weight. The beam from the lighthouse swept across the harbor at that moment, its light cutting through morning mist, landing on Joseph's face. For a heartbeat, he looked like a man exposed before the whole world. And in that harsh brilliance, the first public crack in his armor was sealed forever. If the harbor blessing stripped Joseph of his pride before the town, then Elton delivered the second blow with merciless precision. Word of the Christmas disaster had already traveled, but gossip alone wasn't enough for her. She wanted spectacle. A week after New Year's, the Ladies' Guild hosted their winter luncheon at the church hall, the kind of event where every whisper became a headline by sundown. I had no intention of attending, but Elton did, and she came armed. Later, neighbors told me how it unfolded. Elton arrived draped in furs, lips red as blood, her children trailing behind like reluctant shadows. She smiled too wide, her laughter loud enough to echo off the rafters. And when someone asked about Joseph, she pounced. "Joseph?" she said, her voice sweet but sharp. "He lost the lighthouse." My father-in-law snatched it right from under him. Imagine a grown man undone by his own father. The room buzzed. Some women gasped, others smirked behind gloved hands. Elton leaned closer, savoring it. He promised me legacy, promised me that tower. And what did I get? Nothing but shame. He's ruined himself, ruined us. Tell me, would you trust a man who can't even protect his own inheritance? By evening, the story was everywhere. Men shook their heads at the tavern, muttering about Joseph's weakness. Women whispered about Elton's fury, some pitying, most amused. Children, cruel as ever, repeated the words in schoolyards. I heard it myself the next day, walking through the market. A fisherman chuckled to his friend. Poor Joe! Can't keep his wife, can't keep his father, can't even keep his lighthouse. I said nothing, but inside, I felt the weight of irony. Elton had been my fiercest tormentor, the voice always pushing Joseph to demand more, to humiliate me. Now, she had turned her blade on him, and she struck deeper than I ever could. That evening, Joseph came pounding at my door again. His face was blotched with rage, eyes wild. You think this is funny? He shouted. You think I deserve to be dragged to the mud by her? By you? I met his fury with calm. You gave her the knife, I said. You handed it to her the night you told me I was nothing. Now she's simply using it. He trembled, fists clenched. For a moment, I thought he might strike me, but then his shoulders sagged, and he turned away, muttering curses to the night. I watched him go, the lighthouse beam sweeping across his back as he disappeared down the path. He was a man unraveling, thread by thread, undone not by me alone, but by the very woman he thought would secure his power. And I knew the unraveling wasn't over. The light still had more to expose. By late January, Joseph was a man circling the drain. The town had grown tired of whispers. Now they laughed openly. What began as gossip at the market had turned into mockery on the docks. Every stumble was met with grins and muttered jabs. He carried himself like a ghost, shoulders bent, eyes hollow. The final humiliation came on a Saturday night at the town hall. Every winter, the community hosted a dance, music, food, and fellowship to chase off the darkness of long nights. I hadn't planned on attending, but something in me knew I should, not to celebrate, but to witness. The hall was strung with lights, couples turning slowly on the wooden floor, children darting between tables. I stood in the corner with a glass of cider, watching, listening. It didn't take long for Joseph to appear. Already half drunk, his hair uncombed, his shirt untucked. He staggered through the doors like a man desperate to reclaim what little dignity he had left. At first, the music covered his arrival, but when he stumbled into a dancer, spilling cider across her dress, the room went quiet. All eyes turned. "Careful, Joe," someone muttered with a laugh. "You've lost enough already." The words hit harder than fists. Joseph's face flushed crimson, his hands balled into trembling fists. "Shut your mouth," he slurred. But it only grew worse. From the back of the hall, Elton's voice rang clear as a bell. She had arrived with another man, a banker from the next town, sharp suit, polished shoes. Elton's laughter sliced through the air. "Don't mind Joseph," she called, her smile cruel. "He's just looking for something else to lose." The room erupted in laughter. Cruel, sharp, merciless. Joseph swayed where he stood, humiliated before neighbors, before strangers, before me. The music faltered, the fiddler bow hanging in midair, as everyone watched him crumble. I felt no joy in it, only the cold certainty of justice. This was the third strike, the final unraveling. He had mocked me before my family, my neighbors, my grandchildren. Now the world mocked him, and the balance was set. Joseph's eyes darted across the room until they found mine. For a moment, silence fell again. He stared at me, sweat beading his brow, fury and shame warring in his gaze. Then, without a word, he turned and stumbled toward the door, vanishing into the freezing night. The music resumed, softer, uneasy. People whispered, some shaking their heads, others smirking. Elton twirled on the dance floor with her banker, her laughter rising above the fiddle. I set down my glass and stepped outside. The air was sharp, the stars hard and cold above the sea. The lighthouse beam swept across the sky, steady as always, illuminating the path that Joseph had lost. In that moment, I knew. The town had taken him apart piece by piece. My work was nearly finished. All that remained was the final reckoning. The moment he would stand before me, and the last thread of this story would be cut. The night after the town hall dance, I knew Joseph would come. A man can only endure so much humiliation before he seeks someone to blame, and I was the obvious target. The sea was restless that evening, waves hammering the cliffs as if echoing the storm I sensed building inside my son. I sat by the fire with a book unopened in my lap. The house creaked through the wind. Shadows stretched across the walls. and the lighthouse beam swept rhythmically across my window. Each pulse of light felt like a countdown. Then, 3 heavy knocks. Not polite, not hesitant. A demand. I opened the door, and there he was. Joseph's face was raw, eyes bloodshot, his coat unbuttoned despite the cold. He looked more like a drowning man than the proud son who once mocked me. "Dad," he rasped, "we need to talk." I stepped aside. He entered without waiting for permission, pacing the floor like a caged animal. "You've destroyed me," he spat. "The town laughs at me. Elton parades around with some banker. The kids, they won't even look me in the eye. And you," he stopped, pointing a shaking finger. "You sit here with your fire, your tower, your papers like a king, while I'm left with nothing." I closed the door and leaned against it. "You did this to yourself, Joseph." His laugh was bitter, broken. "No, you planned it. Every move. You wanted me ruined. I wanted respect. I said evenly. You chose arrogance. And arrogance always burns the man who carries it." He slammed his fist against the mantel, rattling the photographs that still hung there, pictures of him as a boy, smiling beside his mother, clutching my hand on the pier. His eyes lingered on them for a moment, softening, but the rage quickly returned. "You could fix this," he said, voice hoarse. "You could sign it back. Give me the tower. Give me something." "No," I answered. "The lighthouse belongs to me now. And when I'm gone, it belongs to the sea. Not to you. Never to you." His face contorted. "You'd rather leave it to strangers in your own blood?" "Yes," I said simply, "because blood can betray. But the sea never lies." For a moment he just stared, chest heaving, fists clenched. Then his voice dropped to a whisper, dangerous and raw. "If I can't have it, no one will." The words hung between us like a knife. My eyes narrowed. "Careful, son." He turned, storming toward the door. You'll see what nothing feels like." And with that, he was gone, vanishing into the night, swallowed by wind and snow. I stood alone in the silence, the fire crackling weakly, the lighthouse beam sweeping to the window like an unblinking eye. His threat lingered in the air, heavy and real. The final confrontation was coming. I could feel it in my bones. The storm rolled in on New Year's Eve like a beast unchained. The Atlantic roared against the cliffs, waves exploding into white fury. The wind howled through the eaves of my house, rattling shutters, driving snow in furious spirals. It was a kind of night sailors feared, the kind of night when the lighthouse was most needed. And I knew that's where Joseph would be. I felt it deep in my bones, the pull toward the tower, his words from the night before, "If I can't have it, no one will," echoed like a curse. I pulled on my coat, took a lantern, and stepped into the gale. Each step along the cliff path was a battle, the snow cutting at my face, the seas roared drowning thought. But above it all, the beam turned steady, relentless, guiding me. When I reached the lighthouse, the heavy oak door was ajar, banging in the wind. Inside, the spiral stairs groaned under my boots as I climbed. Halfway up, I smelled the sharp sting of kerosene. My chest tightened. At the top, Joseph stood by the lantern, a metal canister in one hand, matches in the other. His hair was wild, his face streaked with sweat and snow. His eyes burned with desperation. "You don't deserve this," he shouted over the storm. "You took everything from me. If I can't own it, I'll burn to ground." I stepped forward, the lantern light casting our shadows across the stone walls. "Listen to yourself, Joseph. This tower has stood for generations, saving lives. And you destroy it? For pride." His grip tightened on the matchbox. "You destroyed me, Dad. You chose the sea over your own blood." "No," I said firmly, my voice cutting to the howl. "I chose dignity. I chose truth. You were the one who cast me out, told me I was nothing. Tonight, you prove those words belong to you, not me." The storm slammed against the glass, the tower shaking. Joseph's hand trembled. For a moment, I saw the boy again, lost, frightened, begging for guidance. But that boy was gone, buried under years of resentment. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "No," I answered. "You will. We stood in silence, the only sound the turning gears of the great light above us. Then, with a growl, Joseph hurled the canister aside, metal clanging against the stone floor. He dropped the matches, his chest heaving, tears cutting through grime on his face. "You've taken everything," he whispered, collapsing against the railing. I stepped closer, steady as a light. "No, Joseph. I took back what was mine. You're the one who lost everything. Through your own hand." The beam swept across us, illuminating his broken figure, my steady stance, the gulf between father and son. And in that light, I knew the final moment of reckoning had arrived. The storm raged around the tower, but inside, silence settled, heavy, absolute. Joseph sank to the floor, his back against the cold stone, his fists limp at his sides. The matchbox lay untouched on the ground, the kerosene pooling uselessly near the wall. He had nothing left to throw, nothing left to fight with. I stood over him, the beam sweeping across us both. In that turning light, every truth was revealed. The proud son who mocked his father before the world was now reduced to a man stripped bare, no wife, no children at his side, no respect from the town. Just the storm, the stone, and the father he had betrayed. He lifted his face, eyes hollow. "Why, Dad? Why couldn't you just give it back? Why let me fall this far?" I knelt, my voice calm, steady. "Because you already said it, Joseph. You told me I was nothing to you. I believed you. Tonight, you see what nothing really feels like." His lips trembled. For a moment, I thought he might beg, but pride still clung to him like a curse. Instead, he dropped his head into his hands, sobs muffled by the roar of the sea. I left him there, broken beneath the lantern. As I descended the spiral stairs, the great beam turned above me, casting light into the storm. At the base, I pulled the door shut against the gale. Behind it, Joseph's cries were swallowed by the wind. Back at my cottage, I lit the fire in the hearth. The room glowed with warmth, shadows dancing on the walls. I poured a glass of whiskey. The deed and my will laid neatly on the table beside me. Outside, the storm howled, but inside, peace finally took its place. I raised a glass toward the photograph of my late wife on the mantel. "It's done," I whispered. "The light is ours again." The lighthouse beam swept through the window, joining the fire's glow. Two lights crossing, one born of stone and iron, the other of ash and ember, symbols of survival, of truth reclaimed. My revenge wasn't loud nor violent. It was colder, deeper. Joseph had lost what mattered most, not the stone tower, but his honor, and I had kept mine. Later that night, the storm eased. I stepped outside, the snow crisp underfoot, the air sharp with salt. The lighthouse loomed above, its beam steady, eternal. It belonged to me now, not as property, but as proof. Proof that dignity cannot be stolen, only surrendered. Proof that even when cast out into the storm, a man can rise again. I breathed deep, the cold cutting but purer, and as the light swept over me, I felt not vengeance, but something stronger, peace. Joseph's words had once been meant to bury me. "You are nothing." But tonight, under the turning beam, I knew the truth. I was something. I had always been something. And now, at last, so was the light. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.